This is Right to Life Radio, a production of Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Gerardi.
What we do at Right to Life of Central California, basically we try to help people. We try to help people in all kinds of contexts as it relates to the abortion issue, whether that's women who need health care, whether that's women facing a challenging pregnancy. But we also try to do our part to assist people, women, men, couples who have gone through an abortion and are experiencing regret and are looking for hope and healing. Joining me to talk about a national effort that we at Right to Life of Central California are a small part of is Kevin Burke. Kevin and his wife Teresa were some of the co-founders of Rachel's Vineyard, which is a program of post-abortion healing retreats. And I'm very pleased to welcome Kevin to Right to Life Radio. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. It's great to be with you and your listeners and viewers.
So, Kevin, maybe describe for the audience what a Rachel's Vineyard retreat is, what Rachel's Vineyard is in general. I think it's one of these things where, you know, the pro-life movement gets hit with some of these labels and accusations of, oh, you guys just care about fetuses. You don't actually care about people. You don't actually care about women. But this is a very long-standing, beautiful effort of the pro-life movement to help serve women and couples and men too, actually, who have gone through abortion and have experienced regret and need assistance. So maybe describe what Rachel's Vineyard is and how you and Teresa got it started.
Rachel's Vineyard is a three-day program. It begins on Friday. It ends on Sunday. It's for anyone who has been directly impacted by an abortion decision. So obviously that includes the mother, but also the father. But we also have grandparents attend who have been part of the abortion decision, maybe didn't have a say in the matter. We've even at times had siblings who later learned that a half-brother, half-sister, or brother or sister was aborted. Sometimes we have had folks who accompanied someone to an abortion center, helped pay for the procedure, and perhaps counseled them that this was the best option, and later came to regret that. All those persons I just named, and probably more, can be appropriate for a Rachel's Vineyard weekend. And the weekend itself is a combination of something called living scripture exercises. That is Christian-based Bible stories where you enter into the story as a participant, in a sense. There's something very active and tangible that you do in response to that story. And then there are group process activities. All these things accomplish a couple different goals. One is from the very beginning, you establish emotional and spiritual and physical safety for folks, because this is a very sensitive wound, regardless of people how they feel about it. It's a very sensitive and intimate wound. And so you have to establish that safety initially. And then folks are given the opportunity to work through that experience, to tell their story, to reconnect in love with these lost children. Sometimes there's multiple abortions. In fact, that's half of procedures are multiple. So they connect as parent, mother or father, grandparent, sister or brother with that child in a loving spiritual and emotional relationship. And that is a very healing experience. And Teresa was very much ahead of her time, because that has been reinforced through more recent studies of the brain and of trauma, that her techniques are really helpful for folks who have had some profound emotional and spiritual repercussions from their participation in the death of their unborn child.
How did you and Teresa get into doing this work?
Boy, that's going way back.
Well, let's go way back.
Okay, I'll try. I'm going to be 64 this year, but I'll try.
The shortest questions induce the longest answers. So,
well, I'll give you the abbreviated version. So, a core experience for Teresa was she was working in graduate studies. She was not involved in a pro-life apostolate at this time, or an abortion healing apostolate. She was merely getting her degree in counseling psychology, getting a master's. Part of that experience is that you have an internship where you'll go and you'll kind of get some familiarity with working with folks under supervision. So she worked at a internationally known eating disorder clinic in Philadelphia and was supervised by a psychiatrist. One evening in her group, the issue of abortion came up, And it turns out that 70 to 8% of the participants in that eating disorder group for anorexia and bulimia had an abortion and had varied reactions to the issue that arose. And it was a volatile issue because it involved a boyfriend who was hurt by his own lack of say in the abortion decision. So he was calling and being very angry and nasty to the woman. It was aggravating her eating disorder symptoms. But others also had abortions, had a variety of responses that Teresa goes into great detail in her book, Forbidden Grief. All to say that it was obviously a volatile issue. She's a graduate student. She's like, wow. She steps away from it. She goes to her supervisor, who's a psychiatrist, says, this is what, again, she's not approaching it from pro-life. She just says, look, this issue came up. Had some powerful reactions. I think I need to explore it further. And her supervisor said to her, you're forbidden to address this topic. It has nothing to do with their symptoms. Maybe they need medication adjustment. And he thought that's the end of it.
Jeez. So
of course, interestingly, in terms of looking back at the history, his response propelled her as a young professional and a caring person to say, wait a minute, if they can't talk about it, how am I going to see if that doesn't have an impact on their eating disorder symptoms? And what does it say when we're not allowed to talk about something? That seems to be so against what our goals are here in counseling and in an eating disorder group where you're talking about everything.
Should be the one place where you're allowed to talk about whatever it is. That's
right.
That's
it's absurd, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's the ideological blinders, unfortunately, that we have seen over the years particularly within the profession of psychology and psychiatry, to recognizing that this is a real issue for a lot of folks.
Well, and that's the thing I've been very interested in is the idea, because I've seen some. I don't know, sometimes within the pro-life movement, you'll get some study that comes up that's sort of favorable to us, and there'll be sort of a reaction to it saying, well, I don't know how rigorous that is. And, one of those questions where I'm not sure where it was, where I should fall on it, was the question of post-abortion syndrome or the kinds of, which maybe is sort of a loose term for the sort of bundle of different kinds of psychological responses that people can have as a result of having an abortion. But it does seem to me that the dominant medical culture, which is very left, as far as the dominant academic medical culture, which is overwhelmingly left-wing, read a copy of New England Journal of Medicine and tell me otherwise, would be very politically committed to the idea that no, there's absolutely no mental health repercussions to abortions, absolutely no problems with abortion as far as the mental health outcomes of it. But so I guess I want to ask from your perspective, from your guys' perspective, as being able to engage with the scholarly literature, like is there significant proven psychological impacts to abortion?
Yeah, I don't think there's any debate that this is a real issue, and that there is research to back that up. Obviously there can be a lot of dialogue and contention among professionals and among those who are doing research. You see this all the time into teasing out what exactly do particular research conclusions mean, and drawing what conclusions you draw from that. That's certainly reasonable. But there's no doubt people like, I'm thinking of APART, the Association for Pregnancy Research, Dr. Vincent Rue and Dr. Catherine Coyle is one group that's a APART that has a lot of information and statistics and studies that can help folks see that there are real issues associated with the experience of traumatic loss. I think the idea of post-traumatic syndrome, I don't know if that's helpful as looking at the general issue of emotional trauma. Regardless of one's ideology and what they feel about abortion rights as a social and political issue, consider one of the studies by Arthur Shostak. He's somebody who is not pro-life at all. He accompanied his partner to an abortion center. He's a Drexel University professor. He was surprised by his personal reaction to being present at the abortion procedure. And that kind of spurred him to study men who went to abortion centers with their partners. He found that a third, and this is a pretty large study, over 1,000 men, he said that over a third of the men think about the child that might have been born. 80% think about the child that might have been born, and a third of the men think of the child frequently.
Yeah.
Now, if you're thinking of this fetus as a child, you're thinking of them growing into a person, what would they have been like? And you think about it a lot, well, that tells me that you have been involved in an experience of loss.
Yeah.
And it participated in the death of that child.
Mm-hmm.
If you unpack it further with men, they have powerful feelings and conflictual feelings, and they might feel great relief. At the same time, they might feel great shame. So that's a kind of a short answer to some of the issues you raised, which are very good ones, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and that's, that's what I've seen with, locally even, there are a couple of pastors who talk about as young men. We know of a couple of pastors locally who talk about as young men, they had participated in a girlfriend's abortion decision. And that's exactly what they say is, oh, wow, she would have been 20 years old, or, oh, he would have been, 19 years old. And every year on the anniversary, they recall that. That's so interesting that that's the common thing. One of the people I've seen talk about this is Micheline Friedenberg, who runs, I think, some pro-life organizations, sort of where she takes one of the things she's highlighted is that a lot of the mental health impacts from abortion are very similar to the mental health impacts. While she's clear that obviously abortion and miscarriage are very different things, but sometimes the mental health repercussions from both abortion and miscarriage can be very similar, and that's actually spurred some helpful research to get it out of like the politicized abortion context, just to look at pregnancy loss. Is that something that we're starting to see more? Is just an acknowledgement that as opposed to the the kind of shout your abortion crowd who is sort of refuses to see this. You mentioned that phrase actually earlier in this interview, unacknowledged grief, or what was I forget the exact phrase, but this refusal to acknowledge that this is a legitimate, delegitimizing grief. Like this is the refusal to acknowledge that this is actually a legitimate form of grief, which is itself, I think, exacerbating some of these problems.
Yeah, the worst thing, obviously, you could do to someone who's expressing that they're experiencing a loss and they have some really strong feelings about it is to say that your feelings aren't real. Mm-hmm. And you should feel this way. I mean, you're just shutting them down, and you're going to make they're going to feel more isolated in their pain. And that's what people report to us. They feel more isolated. Mm-hmm. And that just accentuates their suffering. So I think the miscarriage was an interesting analogy, because when you're dealing with a significant loss like that of it, and you recognize, obviously, if it's a miscarriage and you're then, in a sense, we're expecting a baby, you're able to affirm the nature of that loss in a more honest way. You're more conscious of that. So that's something that you're going to feel much more deeply. But folks can also have to realize that, and I think that counselors on the ground who are doing regular counselors and aren't so much ideologues or working for NARAL or organization that has to constantly protect this idea of abortion being the sacred right that we can't impinge upon. We can't talk critically about it because somehow it'll be taken away from us. Now, of course, many of those folks may have abortion in their background and they're reacting out of that. But at the same time, a lot of folks doing the counseling on the ground are open to hearing that, you know what, that experience of pregnancy loss, so no matter what your own personal feelings about that are, the issue of abortion, it can have a relationship to some of the symptoms they might be experiencing. For example, if a woman has experienced previous sexual abuse or trauma of some sort, she can experience the abortion procedure, which takes place in the context of obviously the fruit of sexual intimacy. It just makes total sense that she might have some serious physical, emotional reactions to the procedure itself, to the invasive nature of the procedure. If she at one time has had her physical and emotional boundaries violated very intimately by another, by that, that experience of abortion, as Teresa has taught about in her book Forbidden Grief, and given many, many case studies of how that can be a reenactment of that experience of abuse. And I write extensively about how men, in my work with men in prison, their experience of father loss, father rejection, father abuse, how that can, in a way, lead to greater and stronger abortion reactions when they participate in the death of their child. So there's a whole continuum of responses to folks to intense physical and emotional experiences. There's a continuum. For some, it could be on the spectrum where there's traumatic symptoms. For others, it's causing significant impairment. For others, the impairment's not so evident, but there are spiritual and emotional pain that would be helpful for them to talk about it. That makes sense, John?
Yeah. Well, this whole discussion, like, sometimes within the pro-life movement, something that frustrates me is that we see this sometimes with like lower level pregnancy help centers where they got, especially in California, some of them were getting in trouble for giving out bad information. It was mostly the fruit of, pro-life movement is not exactly flush with cash. We don't have a revenue generating service like the pro-choice side does. And it's a lot of good people with good intentions who maybe aren't running things in the most professional way. And that's a rinky-dink sort of thing that, you're putting together with love and Scotch tape. That's one of the things that's impressed me, though, with Rachel's Vineyard is that you and Teresa brought to it a real sort of professional background and real research, and maybe just tell us a little bit about that and how you were crafting this. Some of the actual clinical psychology research that you used in backing this up, and sort of the professional safeguards that you kind of try to put on Rachel's Vineyard retreats, so that it's not just it's not just a rinky-dink pro-life people with good intentions operation. As much as people with good intentions are good,
Sure.
there's some professional safeguards there.
Yeah, and I think you need both, because you need those folks who have big hearts, that are generous in the use of their time, that are resourceful in their own ways. But you also need the guidance sometimes of kind of professional boundaries and information that can help you present a program that's going to be safe and effective, as well as and be responsible, because you're dealing with a vulnerable population. A lot of these folks have had previous abuse and traumas in addition to the experience of abortion. So we want to make sure that we have a program in place that's going to help give them a safe experience of healing. So Teresa's one of the areas that that we see a lot in trauma therapy, and Teresa could speak. I would suggest you have Teresa on the address this, because this is really her.
Oh, we'd love to. Yeah.
This is her wheelhouse, man. Let me tell you.
Yeah, good.
He teaches and talks about sensory-based treatment and how important that is to help people work through very difficult, painful emotions that, let's face it, for a lot of folks, if you don't have a way to work it through, then if you can deny it and be a workaholic, you'll do that. If you can get a hold of drugs or drink, when you feel the stuff come up, you're numb yourself. You might act out by being promiscuous. You might be like a helicopter parent with your living children. There's different ways you can respond to that stuff if you don't, when you can't have a process to work it through.
Sure.
So she's developed techniques that have been proven scientifically to work through that trauma to the point where you can tell your story, get a cohesive narrative together, and see how the various puzzle pictures of your life that kind of shattered after the abortion, you can put them back together to make sense. And then from that foundation of healing, you can go forth and repair some of the ways that experience hurt you in your relationships. So that's a really important part of the process. But I have to say, the spiritual component is equal, and you know this because you're familiar with this video. The spiritual component is equally healing, because this is a soul wound. We're dealing with areas of the creation of life and our role as parents, and that spiritual component is a necessary part of working really and this is the brilliance of the program, working in a complementary way with nothing forced. No one's forced to declare their faith in Christianity. They're told ahead of time it's based on Christian scriptures, but people come that have various faith backgrounds, and most have some Christian background, but not all. So, that's a little bit of a background on Rachel's Vineyard and some of the things that we have in place for a safe and effective ministry, and also the teams themselves. Let's say very quickly.
Yeah, well, talk a little bit about that, because it's not just a thing of. I mean, I know this, but for our audience, I mean, it's not just a thing of you raise your hand. Hey, I'll help out on a retreat. No, it's a bit more. It's a bit more than that.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I think that's something I do feel good about, that we really have focused very, very strongly over the years in training sites and training teams, and making sure that the folks understand, first of all, they have to go through the process themselves at a site that's approved, and then they're observed as they go through it. And so if there's any red flags, they'll surface, and we'll talk to them about that. If, for instance, if they have trouble, if they see that they're having trouble allowing people to share some very painful information because it's triggering them, and they start shutting them down, which you can see sometimes in a group format.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then we're able to intervene and say, look, you need to work this through further, or perhaps this is not. There's other ways you could serve the ministry. So we're able to screen out folks that really aren't appropriate. They could be fine, good people, but they would not be appropriate to serve on a team for this kind of population. Every team has a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Who's trained as well and is there for, to offer the professional support and guidance. And there's a clergy person, depending on the denomination of the retreat, that's present as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have the team approach, I think, is such a good way to respond to folks who have had trauma rather than just one-on-one. One-on-one can have its benefits, but trauma treatment also puts the fact of just talking about it in a one-on-one relationship is helpful and a great starting point, but the retreat experience helps you really to go deeper into that experience and bring that spiritual and emotional healing.
Well, I feel like I could have you on for 3 hours, so but I do think we're going to wrap up here. So, okay. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, we at Right to Life of Central California have information. If you are listening to this and you feel that Rachel's Vineyard is something that could benefit you, we have our confidential Rachel's Vineyard number. Colton, in post, I don't have it right in front of me, I realized, but anyway, in post, Colton will add it in. If you feel that you can benefit from a Rachel's Vineyard retreat, please do give us a call. Kevin Burke from Rachel's Vineyard, thank you so much for joining us. It was awesome to learn about this wonderful ministry, and we're so proud to be part of it here at Right to Life of Central California.
Thank you so much for your part in spreading the good news of healing, and thank you for the opportunity to share today. I really appreciate it.
The local hotline for Rachel's Vineyard Ministries in Fresno, the English hotline is 1-833-776-0023. That's 1-833-776-0023. In Spanish, the hotline is 1-888-686-8537. That's 1-888-686-8537. And those numbers are also listed on our website, rtlcc.org. Our thanks to Kevin Burke from Rachel's Vineyard for that interview. And if you want to hear the full interview, you can catch the podcast feed for Right to Life Radio. Just search for Right to Life Radio on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. And joining me in studio, here he is, the man, the legend. He's been jet-setting all over the country, Mr. Jonathan Keller from California Family Council. How's it going, Jonathan?
Hey, John, it is good. And yes, I'm a little, I just flew in from Ohio, and boy, are my arms tired. No.
Yes, thank you.
It's been one of those busy travel seasons, so.
I should have known. Your dad joke powers, now that you've been a dad for about 3 or 4 years, are just...
They're growing.
I mean, you were already great at dad jokes, before Wesley was born. But anyway,
I'm trying to come
before
up
Hudson
with,
was born, rather. So
I'm trying to come up with some sort of Lord of the Rings, like my power is growing, like a shadow in the east.
Your
my
powers are weak, old man.
Yes.
Or yes,
yeah.
A new power is rising.
We can do Star Wars. We can do Lord of the Rings.
There you go. All right. So, Jonathan Keller from California Family Council. Let's talk about one of the things Jonathan's organization does really well, and if you go to californiafamily.org, you can find their legislative tracker, which basically covers all of the bad abortion-related bills that are in front of the state legislature. And one of the bills that we are going to be monitoring is AB 315. And this stuff is now starting to get introduced. So basically all the new legislation for the year, for the most part, it has to get introduced by, what's the cutoff deadline, Jonathan? It's like mid-February, late February.
I think they have
deadline.
I think it's like the 17th technically, but then they've got, of course,
then
all
they
their
can always
gut and amend bills and all that.
Yeah, they can always gut and amend, which is a fun California state legislative thing. So this is in the California state legislature for making California state laws. The California State Assembly is kind of like our state version of the House of Representatives. The California State Senate is like our version of the U.S. Senate. So to pass a California law, the Assembly passes something, the state Senate passes something, and then the governor signs it into law, kind of like the federal system where the House passes something, the Senate passes something, the president signs it into law. So one of these bills, these California bills that we are monitoring is AB, that stands for Assembly Bill 315. Now, this has to do allegedly with false advertising.
And John, who could be opposed to shutting down false advertising?
Who could be opposed? Who could possibly be opposed to false advertising? Why would anyone be opposed? Well, just because we feel like this might be weaponized. So it's false advertising on the part of pro-life pregnancy centers, pregnancy medical clinics, or pro-life clinics in general, who can be penalized for, quote, false or misleading statements. Now, what exactly constitutes a false or misleading statement in this context? This has been a frequent gripe from pro-choice entities that pro-life clinics will, in their opinion, use deceptive advertising in order to attract customers, or in order to attract patients. Now, it would be one thing if this meant, okay, now, and I would not support this at all, so let's clarify what we're talking about here. If you have a pro-life clinic saying, hey, come in to get an abortion, and then the patient comes in, and it's like, well, no, actually, we're not offering abortions. Let's talk through the abortion decision from a completely pro-life perspective. Well, that's probably not great. You don't want companies to be just flat out lying to customers. And so that would be bad. There are some pro-life entities that had been passing out materials and information or things over the course of time that were either misleading or based on old or incomplete surveys. So there were a lot of pro-life places that would be pushing the idea that there's a direct identifiable link between abortion and breast cancer. Over time in the pro-life movement, we've sort of, I think that is a much more disputed point nowadays. It's much less clear if and how much there is any actual connection between abortion and breast cancer. Now, so the idea is to penalize clinics that are providing, pro-life clinics that are providing this kind of, quote, false advertising. Now, that's one level of looking at it, but there's another more sinister level, which is the level of basically, this is an ideological position that some people on the pro-choice side take, which is that the fact that you don't offer abortions at all, but are holding yourself out as offering services to OBGYN, to patients seeking OBGYN care or whatever, that in and of itself inherently should be viewed as deceptive, that you're an OBGYN clinic, but you're not going to offer this essential service. Now, is that how far this bill is going to go?
Good question.
I'm not sure. I mean, by that logic, you could sue every Catholic hospital with an OBGYN ward in the state, which maybe that's what they want to do.
As Attorney General Rob Bonta would say, "Don't threaten me with a good time."
Well, exactly. Given my very well-grounded suspicions that Madera Community Hospital is closed right now because Rob Bonta would rather there be zero hospital in Madera rather than a Catholic hospital. So now, here's sort of the key point of how this bill works. The way this bill will be enforced is because it's creating what's called a private right of action. Now, what that means is that's fancy legalese. It means it's creating a right for individuals to sue pro-life clinics. It's banning deceptive advertising. It's not going to be enforced by some state agency. It's not going to be enforced by the California Department of Public Health. It's not going to be enforced by your local county health department, blah, blah, blah. No, this is going to be enforced by individuals suing your clinic because you allegedly have engaged in deceptive advertising. Meaning, in all likelihood, local left-wing activists will identify the local pro-life clinics, they will get ACLU lawyers, and they will sue them. So this raises a lot of questions for me as someone who works on behalf of a pro-life clinic. So here are my questions.
Well, John, the good news is you're an attorney, so you have endless amounts of time to defend frivolous lawsuits defaming the organization.
Yes. So this is the thing. If it's a private right of action, then this could come anywhere, anytime.
Yeah.
I would need to know, how much, and presumably as the text of the law gets amended and developed and we have more testimony before committees in the California legislature, we'll get to know a little more about this. But I would ask, not how much evidence you would need to present in order to win. I want to know how much evidence you need to present just to have a colorable lawsuit that makes it past the motion to dismiss phase.
Exactly.
Okay? So in any lawsuit, one of the first hurdles you have to overcome is what's called a motion to dismiss. And it is exactly what it sounds like. You sue somebody, and the person you've sued files a motion to dismiss. It's basically a motion saying, listen, judge, even if you agree with everything that the suing party said, what they laid out cannot constitute a violation of the law that they're citing. It cannot constitute a successful cause of action, so you should throw out the lawsuit before we waste everybody's time with discovery and litigation and blah, 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 blah. Let's just end this thing now before we get started. So I would want to know how much evidence you have to present on the front end to sustain a motion to dismiss, because that could just lead to a bunch of people filing lawsuits not to win, but to fritter away the limited money resources of pro-life clinics like mine.
That's right.
And that's my concern. Even if, and particularly, and crucially, specifically, even for clinics that are not actually engaged in deceptive advertising, are not lying to people, if we have to spend a whole bunch of money on a lawsuit because they can present some bare indications for a colorable lawsuit to get past the motion to dismiss phase, well, now we're going to be out the tens of thousands of dollars it takes to defend ourselves from this possibly unsuccessful lawsuit.
Right.
So that's my concern. Now, I also think, Jonathan, this probably raises some First Amendment concerns. So I think we need to dig into the text of the bill, and probably it's going to get amended at some point. But it seems as though this is only applying to pro-life clinics. Well, in some sense, maybe. So this is the brilliant thing about this. Some of your listeners may remember from a couple of years ago that there was this whole situation where NIFLA v. Becerra, 2018, it was this lawsuit that was brought by our friends at the National Institute of Family Life Advocates, or NIFLA. And they were suing then Attorney General Javier Becerra, who is now our illustrious HHS Secretary. Secretary of HHS, yeah. He essentially, or I should say, they essentially were saying this law, AB 775 in California, that was requiring pregnancy centers to advertise for abortion, that was unconstitutional. And thank God, that is what Justice Thomas wrote in that decision. And I think they are being very shrewd here. They're realizing, okay, well, we can't force them to advertise for our side, but maybe we can force them to stop advertising altogether. Right. And I guess, though, that's my concern. If you're just saying no deceptive advertising, okay, if this is universally being applied to all clinics, to all OBGYN clinics, to all reproductive health clinics, to all, community clinics or something, that I guess I could understand. I think I have a little bit of a First Amendment problem, though, if they're tailoring this such that it's only going to be applied to clinics that advance a certain sort of First Amendment viewpoint when it comes to the ethics of abortion. Well, and that's the key thing. The advantage of this, John, is that fortunately
whether it's our friends at ADF or NIFLA or whoever else, I think they're going to have a very strong legal case to bring to a judge, because in a press release or in a statement, literally the assembly member who introduced this, Assembly Member Bauer Kahan, she specifically says, quote, California cannot let predatory crisis pregnancy centers continue to lie to pregnant people about abortion care, which, by the way, I find it hilarious. She's talking about lying to people about abortion care when she says pregnant people.
Yeah, lying to pregnant people, because we can't just tell the truth that it's women. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So it does, I mean, the legislation's clearly targeting pro-life clinics. I do wonder if I'm sure that's going to raise some kind of First Amendment question.
Yeah.
It's clear that California knows they can't be as cavalier about the Constitution as they often have been. There's a new sheriff in town.
Mm-hmm.
Her name is Amy Coney Barrett.
Woohoo.
Shifted the balance of power over there. So I think we're gonna see. I am holding this. This is very much something that we are going to monitor extremely closely.
Oh, yeah.
I think this has long been a bugaboo of the left, and they have this sort of shifting standard of what constitutes a shifting standard kind of what constitutes deceptive advertising. Is
misinformation.
What is misinformation? Is everything a pro-life clinic does misinformation because they don't offer abortion? Or are we specifically just talking about actually lying about the services you offer? I think that's what we got to monitor really closely when we look at this legislation. We'll dig more into this after the break. This is Right to Life Radio. Hey, we've got a lot of really awesome events coming up at Right to Life Central California. Friday, March 3rd at, 6 o'clock in the evening, 7 o'clock in the evening at the Student Union at Fresno State. We will be hosting Autumn Lindsay Higashi at Fresno State. This is a joint production between Right to Life of Central California and Fresno State Students for Life. Also on Monday, March 6th, hey, Jonathan, we are coming to Sacramento on the bus Monday, March 6th for the California March for Life. So you can learn about both of these events on our website, righttolifeca.org. You can go to the events and righttolifeca.org/events if you want to learn more. So check it out, righttolifeca.org/events. The word two, T-O, not the number two, righttolifeca.org/events.
So John, I'm curious, is Right to Life bringing one bus or two buses? Because I know you brought two to the San Francisco Walk for Life.
We will bring as many as needed.
All right.
So we'll start with one. If we fill it up, we'll get a second.
Is that a challenge?
It's a challenge. Yes.
There you go. I like it.
Yes.
Well, I'm excited.
Challenge.
I'm excited because my church, Campus Bible Church, is also bringing a bus this year. So
very good.
I know there will be a minimum of two buses from the Fresno area that will be going.
There you go.
So.
Yeah. So yeah, we're excited. Now, this leads me back to the point of the California March for Life is to focus our attention in the pro-life community in California on what our state legislature is doing. And this leads me to a little anecdote. I was speaking earlier this week for a group of high school kids, and I realized that a lot of high school kids actually don't know the process that the state of California writes laws. I think sometimes you and I, Jonathan, doing this show, we sort of overlook how much people understand the lawmaking and political processes within California. And I was talking with these high school kids, like, okay, do you guys know who your state assembly member is? Do you know who your state senator is? No. Do you understand the process? Okay. So part of my talk was teaching them this is how laws are made in California. Mm-hmm. The state assembly is kind of like the House. They know about how a federal law is made. They know about the House of Representatives. They know about the Senate. They know about the president. I'm like, okay, so in California, we have, instead of the House of Representatives, we have the state assembly. Instead of the U.S. Senate, we have the California State Senate. And then instead of the president signing things into law, the governor signs things into law. That's kind of how that works. It's sort of a parallel.
I'm just a bill.
Yes, I'm an executive order, and I pretty much just happen. It was one of the better Saturday Night Live skits from the Obama era. It was like the one time Saturday Night Live was actually willing to make fun of Obama.
That's right.
He passed some kind of very broad, far-reaching executive orders. So that's a thing I've realized is that probably if these high school kids don't know how laws are made,
Mm-hmm.
probably a very decent percentage of California adults don't
Yes.
either. And that kind of makes sense when you look at like the number of voters
Mm-hmm.
in assembly or senate elections. So, I mean, if you look at, okay, Jim Patterson has like 500,000 residents in his district. Every state assembly member has about 500,000 residents in their district. And yet, so even if you assume half of them are adults, like they win their districts with like something like 150,000 votes cast. Okay. So it's clear that a very small percentage of the adult voting public is actually even casting a vote for their state assembly member, for their state senator. The state senate race between Melissa Hurtado and her opponent, it came down to literally like, I think they were separated by not triple digits as far as number of votes. It was incredibly narrow. So that's one of the things we want to highlight with our trip to the March for Life is, you know, it's going to be during the California legislative year. It's going to be while the legislature's in session.
On a weekday.
That's
why we don't go on a weekend. I understand it's hard, folks. I know you got to take time off work or time off of school, but that's when the legislators are there. And if you want to show a public face to the pro-life movement, you got to be there on a weekday.
Right, exactly. I mean, we want to be there when the legislators are there, and we want to use the March for Life as an opportunity to highlight, like, yes, we know Roe v. Wade's overturned, but this is what's happening right now in our states. I mean, the focus of pro-life efforts is now, just because of how difficult it is to actually pass any kind of legislation at the federal level, it's going to be on individual states and individual state legislatures. So, you know, don't think that, you know, just because Roe v. Wade's been overturned, oh, Roe v. Wade's overturned, hey, we're good. No, to the contrary. Okay, the state legislature in California last year passed like 13 different very aggressive radical abortion laws. They're going to probably try to pass a bunch more this year. I'm sure AB 315 is not the last of these bills that we're going to hear about, really bad abortion bills that we're going to hear about this year. So basically, that's what we want to do with the California March for Life. Again, you can go to righttolifeca.org/events. Use this as an opportunity to educate our supporters, educate the general public about what the state legislature is doing when it comes to abortion.
It's a great opportunity, folks. I hope you come. And I can also guarantee you the weather in March will be much better than the weather in June.
Yes, for the last year's March for Life. That's definitely true. All right, we're doing a special podcast-only segment that maybe we'll apply this for the Saturday, February, not February, what is it, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, not February 11th. Maybe we'll do this for Saturday, February 18th. So, Jonathan, I wanted to talk very quickly about this 13th Amendment stunt.
Yes.
Okay. So, there's a federal
Written
judge.
well about by our friend, Ed Whelan over at National Review, I
Ed
think?
Whelan. Okay, there we go. As long as he's not trying to find the true Brett Kavanaugh.
That's
killer. Okay. Anyway, Ed's only blind spot. His zeal for defending good old Brett Kavanaugh. So there's this federal judge who seems to be engaged, and this is the thing when you're a federal judge. Just when you're a federal district court judge or higher, is you have lifetime tenure. So you can't get fired.
Yep.
And it is astonishing.
Come at me, bro. Nothing can happen.
I mean, the worst that's going to happen is that the circuit court above you will overturn you. Is pretty much the worst thing. The only way you can really lose your job is by getting impeached and removed from office. So to do that, like the House of Representatives would have to impeach you, and then the Senate would have to convict you.
And that has happened like in 250 years. It's happened
it's happened a handful of times, but it's really only happened to federal judges who've been caught red-handed taking bribes.
Yeah, it's virtually impossible.
Yeah. So as long as you're not doing that, you've got lifetime tenure. And it is actually very impressive with federal judges based on certainly the experience of people I know who have clerked for federal judges and federal judges they've loved, federal judges they've not loved, how much that lifetime tenure can impact your personality and your decision-making attitudes. Because
I can
again,
only
you're not going
imagine.
to lose your job. You've got a great job for life. So with very nice bennies. So
And literally, John, just again for perspective, people like these jobs so much, and it is so flexible that literally people die in office. I understand if you're a Supreme Court judge, it's different, but it's like,
Yeah.
I would rather than going and taking time with my family, getting to travel, do whatever, I will literally die in office.
Yeah, and for people less than Supreme Court justices, they have this thing called senior status, where basically you can heavily reduce the number of cases you take. You just come in kind of when you feel like it. You don't have as many clerks and stuff. And even retired Supreme Court justices can do something like that, where Justice Souter, for example, who was from, I forget which state in New England he was from, after he was retired as a Supreme Court justice, he would come and sit in on panels of the First Circuit, kind of like a helping out, sort of like a retired judge. So, and I'm trying to remember, I know Souter retired a little sooner because he never actually liked being a Supreme Court justice. So as soon as Obama was in office and could replace him, he kind of split. So
But
anyway,
in this case, Judge, what is her name?
Judge Colleen Collar Cottley. So let me read about this from the Hill.
Who, by the way, John, just I looked it up because she's a district court judge.
Clinton appointee.
Annual salary of $223,400.
Not bad.
Nope.
Not bad. So here's the story about this from the Hill. She's trying to suggest that there might be a different kind of constitutional right to abortion, in spite of the fact that Justice Alito was pretty clear that there wasn't any constitutional right to abortion. It was pretty darn clear about that in Dobbs. Federal judge suggests abortion may still be protected by the 13th Amendment. A federal judge this week suggested abortion could still be federally protected even after the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade last summer, according to court filings. U.S. District Judge Colleen Collar Cottley, who was nominated by former President Clinton, asked the parties in an ongoing criminal case on Monday to file briefs on whether the High Court considered the entire Constitution in overturning Roe, or if it only found that the 14th Amendment didn't confer abortion rights.
And John, let me just say, if I can stretch an analogy.
Yeah.
The fact, I know you're going to get into this in depth, but the fact that the court would be so guarded in this, I have heard of judicial modesty, but this would be the equivalent of a judicial hijab or a burqa, a judicial burqa.
Yeah.
They're like,
So,
I refuse to even consider other aspects of this.
Well, and especially when you look at, let me continue. Okay.
Yes.
So, despite the landmark Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization decision, the judge went on to suggest that the 13th Amendment, which was ratified after the Civil War and which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, could perhaps cement abortion rights. Here, the issue before the court in Dobbs was not whether any provision of the Constitution provided right to abortion, Collar Cottley wrote. Rather, the question before the court in Dobbs was whether the 14th Amendment to the Constitution provided such a right.
I love the fact, John, that she herself emphasized the phrase 14th Amendment, and just the fact that she's trying to be so cute is just like, well, maybe the 14th Amendment did. I mean,
but maybe it was the 13th.
Yeah.
So just for context here, after the Civil War, there were 3 constitutional amendments that the victorious North pretty much laid out as preconditions for the Southern states to come back into the Union. 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 15th Amendment made newly freed African slaves into American citizens and voters. And the 14th Amendment had basically a lot of different provisions for a lot of different kinds of stuff to ensure various kinds of civil rights, if you will, protections for everyone in the United States, and applied a lot of these provisions against states. So basically saying states had to respect had to respect due process. So no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, the 14th Amendment was used in Roe v. Wade as its justification for legal abortion. Basically, they said, well, hidden within that word liberty, that no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, is a right to have an abortion. And Justice Alito, in his decision, said, no, it's not hidden somewhere in the 14th Amendment. You can't just cook up new rights that aren't expressly stated and claim that they're in the 14th Amendment unless it is essential to a scheme of ordered liberty and is deeply rooted in American history and legal tradition. So that's the standard that Alito applied, and that's a standard that goes back to the 1990s with this decision called the Glucksberg, where the Supreme Court was trying to answer the question, does the 14th Amendment confer a right to physician-assisted suicide? And they said no, because there's no deeply rooted American tradition, legal tradition, of protecting a right to physician-assisted suicide. And that was Justice Alito's analysis. He looked at the whole kind of scope of American legal history and was trying to figure out, well, was there ever some deeply rooted tradition of abortion being recognized, not just as something that wasn't illegal, but as some kind of right, as something that was actually a right? And he couldn't really find either. There's just no real history in America of abortion being some kind of protected right. That's why this is so stupid, this 13th Amendment argument, okay? So Alito already, look, you can't be, look, if the Glucksberg standard is going to apply to the 14th Amendment, if basically we're going to say you can't just cook up new rights that aren't expressly stated in the Constitution unless it's very deeply rooted in American history and legal tradition. You can't cook up these rights and say that they're in the 14th Amendment. If that's true for the 14th Amendment, which is admittedly a little broader, you certainly can't do that for the 13th Amendment, okay? You can't say that, well, the 13th Amendment abolishes involuntary service, and that applies to a right to abortion. No, if American history and legal tradition is going to be the standard by which we assume that there are rights hidden in the 14th Amendment, it's got to be the standard by which we're also looking if there are rights hidden somewhere fancifully in the 13th Amendment. So this is stupid on like 20 different levels, especially, okay, like, is an unexpected or unintended pregnancy hard or difficult? Yes, it is. Is it involuntary servitude or slavery? No. No. It is. You might, even if you are very pro-choice, and even if you think it is unjust, whatever, it is even if you think it is the most terrible thing in the world, it is clearly a different, in your interpretation even, it would be a very different kind of bad thing.
Right.
From the bad thing that is involuntary servitude or slavery, okay? Which is you have to work and no one pays you and you are forced to do this work and you don't have a choice in the matter, okay? So it's a whole different category of thing. So in short, I think this is stupid. And this is the kind of thing that you can say and do when there's no risk of you getting fired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I loved the fact that Ed Whelan, at writing for the Bench Memos column at National Review, called it Judge Caller Cottley's grandstanding abortion folly.
That's a good title for it. So anyway, I just want to reassure our listening public, no, there's not going to be some other kind of Roe v. Wade-esque decision creating a new right to abortion somewhere out of some other text of the Constitution. This is complete poppycock on the part of this one rogue federal judge. You can find one federal judge to say almost anything if you forum shop hard enough. And anyway, I do not think this is going to even make it to the Supreme Court for them to say that it's wrong, let alone, yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be, it's absolute poppycock.
Yeah. Well, so again, I'm reading from National Review. He says,
as you smack the microphone.
Ed Whelan says, so no, it is not entirely possible. It is rather ludicrous to posit that the court might have held in Dobbs that some other provision of the Constitution provided a right to abortion.
Yeah.
And then back to him, he says, the court's declarations in Dobbs that, quote, the Constitution does not confer a right to an abortion, unquote, and that the Constitution does not prohibit citizens from each state from regulating or prohibiting abortion, unquote, mean what they say.
Right.
Yes, those courts declarations, it's like, it's plain right there.
So her whole premise of, well, they said the 14th Amendment couldn't, maybe some other part. No, the court in Dobbs very explicitly said, no, the Constitution does not protect abortion. So this gal is completely out to lunch. I'm sure that the circuit court above her will overrule her decision. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting as a legal thing, and we wanted to comment on it. All right, Jonathan. I think we'll wrap it up. Any final thoughts for the podcast-only audience?
No,
Basically, my dad and.
Oh, well, in that case, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
No, I'm just. It's always fun to be able to get into this legal nerdery.
There you go.
A little bit since I was I never actually made it to law school.
Well,
but,
someday, Jonathan. Someday when you grow up.
I like to throw out these ridiculous things I see online so that John can smack them down with great fury.
There you go. All right, well, that'll do it for Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next time, guys.